that we wanted it to not detract from the house, and we want it to integrate with the garden, and that's what I think the architect's plans have achieved. I've brought along a couple of photos today, which will be circulated later, to show you the street view of our house from the corner where we're proposing to build the studio. As you'll see, there is no street view of the house from that corner at the moment. There's a 30-metre street frontage along Amherst Street, and the street view of the house is on the northern half of that boundary. The proposed studio won't be seen from that part of the boundary. The studio will also be set below the road level. So our garden is about 1 to 1.5 metres below the road level, which allows us to retain into that little bank that we have and build a studio that will be about the same height as the fence. So there'll be very minimal impact from the outside. It's also set on High Street, so we're hoping it might act as a little bit as a noise barrier as well. The other option that the previous planning officer put to us was to put the studio in front of our house on the northern boundary. We're not keen to do that because we've got a 100-year-old fig tree that sits in that location, and we would rather not remove the fig tree. Yes, so in short, I think Bryn and Councillor Ben came out and looked at the site, and I really appreciate that, and hope that they can also add to the discussion when the time comes about, you know, the impacts on the site and the garden. So we've really sought to minimise the impact while getting extra space for the family.
Thank you. Now you can either watch on the live stream at home, or you can contact the officers tomorrow to find the result.
Great, thank you.
Is anyone else like to do the same before we move on? If you'd like to make your presentation now and then leave, rather than wait for your item to come up on the agenda, we can offer that in the circumstances. All right. So petitions. There are none. Deputations. There are none. Special deputations. There are none. Presentations. Elected members. None. Confirmation of the minutes. I move accept the minutes of the Planning Committee meeting the 2nd of February 2022. I'll move that way. Is there a seconder? Councillor Groom. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you. Elected member communication. I'd just like to point out that it's Phillida Roddick's last meeting tonight, and thank her for her service to the city. Phillida is moving to a new job at University of Western Australia, and on behalf of the Planning Committee for all the work you've done, I thank you for that and wish you well in the future. Any other elected member communication? Reports and recommendations, so we move into the agenda. Item 1 is a deferred item, demolition Brack Street. I will move the office, well, not the, sorry, so do you wish to speak in any particular order? I've got John Meredith. Oh, sorry, where's it gone? There's no one here from Brack Street. Ah, sorry, I thought you were. Right. Right, so it's, sorry. I thought there were people here for that, so we're on to item 3. Henderson Street. There are 3 people to speak. Do you wish to speak in any particular order? I've got John Meredith first. You have 3 minutes. You'll need to be fairly close to the microphone.
Thank you. Good evening. Thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight on this application. I'll stick to my 3 minutes. I speak in favour of the officer's recommendation. However, I'm seeking a variation to condition 4 relating to the time frame to construct the art wall. I'm the CEO of 58, the owner of the Spicer site since 2018. To be clear from the outset, our unwavering vision for the Spicer site is to deliver a landmark boutique hotel project along with vibrant new food and beverage offerings to support the ongoing transformation of this important part of Fremantle. Public art and working with local artists will be a key part of that project vision. COVID has not affected our commitment to this development at all, but it has driven us to reassess and challenge our design scheme to reflect post-pandemic traveller needs. We're confident our design scheme will deliver upon the vision, and we intend to progress that DA for your consideration in the coming months. Tonight's application seeks demolition of the existing warehouse and careful deconstruction of the heritage wall that adjoins this warehouse. This is the first important step towards this development. Given our existing car park is often at capacity, we saw a temporary conversion of the warehouse land to public parking as a positive and logical outcome for the precinct. The demolition raises two logical questions which I'll address. The first is the well-regarded public art mural of the Numbat by Belgian street artist Rower. This art was engaged by the city in 2011 when they owned the car park. However, it's important to note that even at that time, it was envisaged the site would likely be redeveloped in the future and that wall would be demolished at some point in the future. 5/8 has been engaging with Rower in recent months, who advocated that street art by its very nature is ephemeral. That is something that doesn't last forever. As a result, we are committed to instead exploring ways to reinterpret the Numbat within our future redevelopment of the site. The second question relates to the heritage wall. Structural and heritage advice indicates the heritage wall does not have the integrity to stand by itself if the warehouse is demolished. Under our redevelopment, our proposed approach is to carefully deconstruct that heritage wall and utilise the limestone and other artefacts we discover to reincorporate into an artistic gabion wall. And that's to frame a new laneway between Henderson Street and Paddy Troy Mall. For those not familiar with the term, gabion walls involve placing rocks and artefacts within a steel cage. That presents both a structural and an artistic wall outcome. The office's recommendation is for construction of this art wall within 6 months of demolition. However, this is not practical. Our hotel development scheme includes excavation of a basement, and therefore, if constructed prior, the art wall would likely be damaged or severely compromised when we start excavation of that basement in the future. We fully support a realistic timeframe for construction and therefore request that Condition 4 be amended to 18 to 24 months to align with future construction of the hotel and basement. Thank the Planning Committee and elected members for their time.
There are two other people from the applicant present who are not speaking, but they're available to answer questions. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Councillor Lang.
Thanks. And thanks for coming in this evening. Just had one question. Has any consideration been given to leasing the building out rather than demolishing it for other uses between now and construction? Yep. Yep. And the other question that I had was, you may have mentioned it, when do you plan to recommence or lodge the DA for the hotel? Okay, thank you.
Any further questions of the applicant? Councillor Lorver.
Yeah, I believe it was one of my first meetings where we voted to extend the DA application for this site, and excited about the development. Thanks for coming down. I just wonder, is there any issue if we extended the application? Why is there a rush to dismantle this building and the wall right now? I mean, why can't we just wait till we see the DA and how it's going to be used?
Mayor Fitzharding?
Sort of leading on from those comments from the other councillors, best case scenario with the DA for the development of the hotel, when would you see work starting on site to start construction?
Any further questions from the committee? I will now go into committee. I'll move the officer's recommendation. Is there a seconder? Councillor Lang. Any debate? Councillor Lang.
Thank you. The first point I'd like to make is I'm in support of the minor amendment suggested by the applicant.
To extend the period from 6 months to 18 months?
18 months, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm in support of that. And for background, I've been quite involved in this site and this project with the original architect Space Agency. I think some of their work may have carried over to the other architects that were involved, and a number of workshops with some of the team from Minderoo when it was, and Paddy Troy, other owners in Paddy Troy Mall. And through those workshops, this laneway connection through Paddy Troy to Henderson was really established as a key link. So understand that may be coming through in some of the future developments. I guess in foreshadowing a possible deferral on this, I am broadly in support of what's being proposed, but I personally would like to see more detail in context of the design of the laneway, and it's around the demolition of the wall. I want to make sure before I say yes to demolition, I know exactly what the design of the new old wall looks like, so I can be comfortable authorising demolition. And if we have to hold up, we'll defer it to the next planning meeting, which is a month away. That may allow time for the DA to be lodged and for us to cite the plans and understand it has to go through the design advice committee, and it probably ends up going to JDAP. But personally, if we could defer this to the next meeting, I'd be far more comfortable in giving the green light to demolition if I can see the context of this reconstructed wall in the scheme of the laneway and the hotel design. So just foreshadowing that possible deferral, and if I can move the minor amendment, or someone else would like to move the minor amendment, perhaps.
Or would you like to move the minor amendment first? We can deal with that. That's simply to change the 6 months requirement to 18 months.
Yeah, I'll move that.
Is there a seconder for that?
I sought some advice from officers about the best way to do this, because I think there is the 18 months factor, but I mean, I know we can't link a demolition approval to the approval of the DA, but I did seek advice from officers as to how we might be able to link this to works occurring on site. So we can certainly make this minor amendment to 18 months, but there are some additional words that the officers prepared that perhaps we can look at adding into that, and maybe if we can put them up here, you as a mover might consider those words. So really what we were trying to say was, well, perhaps I might go to director to talk through how we kind of try to link the two without linking the two, knowing that that's not a valid planning.
Councillor, can you
Through you, Chair. Yes, as the Mayor said, the intent of this wording, which I think is essentially is also doing what the applicants have requested, in that it's primarily extending the time frame for construction of the artwork reconstructed wall to 18 months. The bit the Mayor has touched on is that whilst it's not not appropriate to kind of intrinsically link two completely separate and standalone development applications. The intent behind this was to try to ensure that if the upcoming development application for the hotel proceeds successfully and is approved, and there's an opportunity for the developers to act on that approval slightly more quickly, that wording of the alternative of upon completion of below ground level works. And the reasoning for that is we understand that the hotel proposal does include a basement, and the applicants have quite reasonably pointed out that it would be difficult to construct the basement if the art wall was already in situ without potentially damaging the art installation. But if there was an opportunity to complete those below ground level works as a sort of the first stage of the overall hotel development, once works have got up to ground level and are proceeding above, if that happened in a period sooner than 18 months, this would provide an opportunity for the art installation to proceed a little more quickly.
I'll just check that the mover and seconder are happy with that amendment. Okay, so that is moved and seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Okay, I'll move the amendment. All those in favour? That's unanimous. So that amendment becomes part of the motion. So the recommendation now is for approval with that amendment. Is there any further discussion? Sorry, Councillor Sullivan.
Yeah, look, this has similarities to the Brack Street issue for me, mainly because I think it's quite clear that the limestone wall has cultural significance, and we're approving demolition. And I'm not that confident that we technically should be doing that. What we're really saying is, yes, it has significance, and no, we're not approving demolition, but we will allow it to be dismantled and reinterpreted in another form, which I support, because I think it would be very difficult and almost its significance would be lost anyway if it was just somehow incorporated inside a building with no reference to its past. So in this way, the interpretation approach probably provides a much greater opportunity to not only interpret the wall, but to interpret all of the Spices site and everything that it was. So to me, it's a conservation strategy for the site, but it's worded as a demolition approval. So I wouldn't mind asking the question: is this not actually, in a sense, the wrong way to deal with it legally? Given that we know our scheme does not allow us to approve demolition if something has a cultural significance, or at least some cultural significance, and this has more than just some. So that, I guess I'll ask that question first, and might reserve my right to speaking.
I'll ask the manager to answer. Thank you.
This is one that we did grapple with, and the, I guess, initial position was to retain the wall, and ideally that would be the best case scenario. The applicant has put forward this option of dismantling the wall and retaining all the materials and essentially rebuilding it. Look, it isn't as clear cut as it's just full demolition, and there are a lengthy set of conditions that talk about the way this wall is to be treated and re-prepared. And I guess that's why the time frame is quite important for us in making sure that it is tied to the site and retained. The level of significance of this wall is, in the scheme of things, not high. It is on the lower end of the scale, and if it was of a high level of significance, then the recommendation would be for refusal.
Thank you. Any further comments, Councillor Sullivan?
Yeah, look, and that's sort of my dilemma, is because the report talks about what the threshold tests are, but then doesn't really say whether it meets the threshold test or not. And so in approving demolition, it's kind of like left open that it has little or no significance. And in doing that, it I think, diminishes the value of the wall. It basically says it's not of sufficient heritage to warrant retention at all, and then potentially weakens the argument somewhere down the track if we end up having an argument about the reinstatement. And so I just sort of, it only really occurred to me today that sort of connection between what the scheme says and how we need to deal with it in a legalistic sense might be connected. I might be completely wrong. It might be that we're not approving, in a sense, even though we're not stating it, but we're not approving demolition. We're approving a type of conservation. But I'm just not absolutely clear that that's what our recommendation says. And yeah, I'm a bit nervous about that because I don't know what then our legal strength is in making sure that it is actually delivered as a conservation project further down the track. Because at the moment it could just be considered an art project and not, something that's sort of almost voluntary rather than, yeah.
I'll ask the director to reply.
Through you, Chair. I mean, I think our view as officers, as the manager has said, is whilst the report doesn't explicitly use the terms non-limited, some or high, in our view, it's in the limited range, and in that context, there's not, in our view as officers, there isn't an outright legal impediment in terms of the way the scheme clause is worded that would preclude this being assessed as a demolition proposal. I mean, obviously, that level of significance, as committee members know well, is a matter of judgment, and the judgment can differ, as indeed it has on another item on this agenda, which as to whether others agree with that assessment of the level of significance. But our view is there isn't a clear legal barrier that would prevent the application being approved because of the wording of the scheme clause.
Councillor Groom.
To explore that line of questioning, would it make more sense to us if the approval wording was demolition of existing building, conservation of heritage wall, brackets, dismantled, etc., and go on with the change of use? So it is, to Councillor Sullivan's point, that we're not approving demolition in the sense of that word, but we are approving conservation management that involves demolition and reuse.
I'll just ask if the title is part of the recommendation and if it can be amended.
Yes, that's a simple change that we can add in.
Is that an amendment the committee needs to make, or can the officers do that? Do we need to move that way?
Move it. Are you happy with that?
So the actual resolution on page 49 is what will be the recommendation to council. Do you think it's necessary to change the title of the item, or are you happy with that?
Sorry, it's a committee decision, correct? Yeah.
Councillor Green, would you be happy if we just change the title?
I don't know which title you're referring to. I was suggesting that after approve, it says under the Metropolitan blah, 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 demolition of existing building, heritage management of heritage wall, or yeah, conservation management of heritage wall. So adding 3 words
Yep.
after the comma and before heritage wall.
Just check the officers have that. And you move that as an amendment.
I will.
Is there a seconder? The Mayor. Is there any further discussion on that? Councillor Sullivan?
Yeah, so just to check, I mean, that some applications come in as pure demolition applications. Some applications come in as demolition and planning applications. I'm not sure if there is a clear distinction in a sense, but as long as it's clear that it was a demolition application for the bulk of the building and a planning application to do something with the heritage component of the building, then I think that is satisfactory, and that actually does make it different to a pure demolition application. So I guess I'm just a little bit surprised that previous proposals for this site absolutely identified this wall as being required to be conserved. So presumably previous, I guess, assessments inside the city had been that the wall needed to be retained. So it was just surprising to me that there wasn't any particular articulation of what level of cultural significance staff considered the wall to have, and that leaves it ambiguous. So,
Any further discussion? So the amendment is moved and seconded. Can I see all those in favour? Carried unanimously. So back to the motion with 2 amendments. Any further discussion? Councillor Lang.
I did flag earlier on that I had a deferral drafted for it. Personally, I would really like to see more detail on this new reconstructed wall, and that I assume would probably come in with the DA. And if that is to be lodged shortly, as we understand, if this was deferred to the next appropriate planning meeting, so we could see what we're going to get in exchange for the reconstruction, I think this would sit a lot more comfortably with me. So that's.
So there is a referral motion on the screen. Are you formally moving that? No. That's moved by Councillor Lang. Is there a seconder? Councillor Lawler. Any discussion on the referral? Mayor Harding.
Can I just get a comment from officers in terms of what, whether this is going to have any potential impact on timelines and timeframes for this project moving ahead?
That's possibly a question for the applicants. Ultimately, the way we sit at the moment is the JDAP is technically lodged, but on the request of the applicant was put on hold immediately. I think it was to do with the conditions of deed and having to get their application in. So at this point in time, it is still on hold, but the applicants have advised that new plans are imminent, so it could be any day now. Ultimately, it would just hold up the approval. So if it was referred, then obviously that just takes extra time. So yeah.
Okay.
Any further comment or?
So that was a question. I mean, I guess I'm slightly concerned. I really wouldn't want to see this slowed down because I think it is a bit of a, you know, it's a very prominent site, and I think the sooner that we get something on it, the better. I'm personally quite happy that, you know, and I think in contrast to another application on the agenda tonight, that we get an application for demolition that speaks very clearly to how the heritage elements are going to be dealt with, and, you know, has detailed planning around that we can actually understand. Whereas, you know, and I completely understand with the construction timeframes why, and the desire to do something significant on that site, why the wall A can't be retained and B will need to be stored effectively before it can become a gabion wall. So, you know, I know we're taking it on trust and saying, you know, we think that genuinely is moving ahead right now, but I won't be supporting a referral for that reason. I just don't think it's necessary.
Councillor Groom.
Yeah, I'd like to clarify because I understood that the first of the two amendments that were moved would have the same effect as this referral because it requires that we see the detailed design before a demolition permit is issued. Is that the amendment that was made? My understanding of it? Thanks.
Yep, just wanted to clarify that the intention of this wouldn't delay any hotel construction. It would merely only delay the operation of the car park. That was the main point. And question is the point that Councillor Groom just made, that before the issue of a DA, would that come back again to planning committee? Would we have an opportunity to cite the details of the wall again and vote on this?
So the details of the wall should come in with the JDAP plans. So that will obviously come through committee and be subject to quite extensive consultation. It won't, I don't think the intention for the applicants is to provide it as part of this DA. It will, of course, need to come in as part of condition clearance before they start work on site. So the way the potential approval operates now is that those details coming in with the new DA plans can kind of happen after the approval. But if it is deferred, then they may well be able to provide it with their DAP sort of a timing thing. But this application won't necessarily hold up the JDAP moving forward.
Councillor Lawler.
Yeah, I'm supportive of the amendments that passed and also the referral. I mean, we've been asked to delay this once on behalf of the applicant, and I don't really see whether there's a public car park there this month or next month as being a big deal. But once that wall is gone, it's gone forever. And so having a little more detail before we make a final decision, I think is very important. So I'll be voting to support the referral because I believe it's the right thing to do.
Any further discussion? Councillor Sullivan.
Yeah, on the referral, I won't support it. My sense of it is if you're confident that a Gabion wall reinterpretation of the heritage is acceptable from a heritage point of view, the detail of that I'm more than happy to leave to our experienced officers to handle because it's the detail that they would be dealing with every day. And that's pretty normal. I mean, normally, even in most planning applications, you're getting a sense of what somebody is trying to do, but the final detail is always that which gets signed off by the officers to make sure it's consistent. So I'm sure if the officers felt that it wasn't actually achieving a level of interpretation that was indicated and warranted, then they would probably bring it to our attention, and the process would require a change. So I don't really see the difference, I have to say, and it's like having that trust when you say the final details of a big building are subject to signing off at the DAC in terms of its materiality. I mean, I don't need to see every last detail, and it wouldn't be really appropriate because I don't think we as a committee would have that level of expertise anyway.
Any further discussion?
Yeah,
Councillor Lang.
Just closing that item.
Well, sorry, if you're going to close, I want to speak. So do you want to? Oh. Okay. I think there is a problem with the referral in that, at best, we would be shown plans that haven't been approved yet or assessed yet. So it'd be shown the wall in the context of a plan which may subsequently change after we've approved the demolition of the wall. So I think if the referral allowed us to see a timeline where we saw the wall in the full context of an approved plan, that would make some sense. But I think it doesn't actually achieve very much because we are still acting on good faith that the plans that are submitted with the wall shown will be the plans that are built and not changed. So I don't support the referral close.
Thanks. Doesn't seem very popular, clearly. Yeah, for my peace of mind, I did want to see more detail. I'm not against the demolition of the wall, and I'm in full support of what has been proposed on the site. I just wanted to see some more detail on how it's going to be interpreted. So that's me on the referral, which I'll still support it.
So we're voting now on the referral. All those in favour? That's Councillors Lang and Lorver. And those against? You got that? So we'll now move to the recommendation as amended. Is there any further discussion? We'll move to a vote. All those in favour of the recommendation as amended? Thank you. That's unanimous. Next item is item 16 Jocelyn Street. Mr. Morris, is it? Yeah. You have 3 minutes starting now, and if you'd like to come up to the microphone. Sorry, are there any questions to the applicant? No, sorry, thank you. So this is 16 Jocelyn Street, renovation of the existing dwelling and the addition of a second group dwelling. I'll move the officer's recommendation, which is for approval. Is there a seconder?
Before you do that, sorry, I wouldn't mind asking a question.
Okay. So, sorry, would you like to come back to the microphone? So Sullivan.
Yeah, thanks. There's a question being raised about where the second story component of the rear dwelling is. And as to whether it could be moved in terms of overshadowing the front dwelling. Yeah. So my question goes to, I mean, I had a quick look at it and I was assuming that the upper story was designed based on, requirements for setbacks from side boundaries and rear boundaries so that you could actually have decent windows in it. Could you explain the philosophy of the upper story and why it's sort of in the middle of the site and why it's quite close to the existing dwelling? Yeah, so there's a question that's going to be raised about overshadowing of the existing dwelling. I just wondered if there was any other way of building the second story so it wasn't overshadowing the existing dwelling, but also what the consequences of moving that bulk of the second story to another part of the site might be.
Any further questions to the applicant? Thank you. So I'll move the officer's recommendation, which is for approval. Is there a seconder? Ms. Sullivan, would you like to speak?
Yeah, so I do support this, and I know that it's been flagged that maybe it should be deferred for seeking some changes to it. But I had a very close look at that and wondered myself whether it could actually be repositioned. The second story could be repositioned on site to improve the solar access to the old house, while also being trying to deal with all of the issues that you have with your side neighbours and your rear neighbours, and then issues of your livability in your own house in terms of having decent sized windows rather than just highlights in every room. And I very quickly came to the conclusion that essentially the upper floor was designed based on 6 metre setbacks to the rear and to the side, so that you could have decent windows, and particularly on the north side, that's really important. I also looked at the way that what would be achieved by rearranging the upper floor so that it didn't cause an overshadowing. And what I kind of concluded, well, actually, the single-story parapet probably causes as much loss of direct sunlight to windows set about a metre away from the wall as the upper floor, which is set further away. So that even if the upper floor was sort of moved around the site, it wouldn't necessarily result in improved solar access to the existing cottage. So I kind of felt that, with reasonable consideration, that it was such a good proposal compared to where we were, that it was something that I would be prepared to support without changing it. So,
thank you, Councillor Groom.
Yeah, so agreed that part of the problem is that the fence and the parapet wall is right on, a metre or something away from the existing residence. However, the R codes does require us not simply to look at the percent of the lot that is overshadowed, but to look at the daylight access and the amenity of a dwelling. And whilst our officers have assessed this scheme as though the front dwelling is part of the one property, its future use is for someone else. And this development completely denies the solar access and daylight access to the entire northern wall of the existing property, whilst maximising the same access for themselves, which I guess is a complaint I come up with a lot when we're looking at these schemes. It seems incredibly unjust to me. So I did look at what could be done to reduce that impact, and also looked at the fact that we are being asked to consider extra height. In my view, that extra height does make the rear building more visible from the street, and the fact that it is further forward on the rear site again makes it more visible. And the front building has an incredibly low roof line, so this will stick up behind it. And when I look at the overshadowing diagram, that upper story does make a big difference to the amount of bulk that is kind of blocking daylight access to the rear of the building, and will change the amount of time of the day that various parts of it are shadowed, because it is just so prominent, and particularly in winter will have a quite dramatic effect on that back part of the building. So I don't want to say no, because on the whole I think it's a good scheme and will be a nice house, but there's lots of options for that second floor because it doesn't take up the whole space. There are options, given the size of the site, that would still allow good northern windows and actually give a good better solar passive outcome for the new house, because it wouldn't have a second floor that was getting hammered by morning and afternoon sun in summer, which having a second floor that gets some late afternoon in summer, the less wall the better. So I would like to propose that we refer this back to the administration and encourage the proponent to take another look to see if the impact on that front dwelling, which is quite a lovely dwelling, which is a good extension, so it's going to turn it into a good quality house, apart from the fact that it gets no sun for several months of the year. Encourage the proponent to relook at their scheme with that in mind.
So do you wish to move that now? Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Lorber, do you wish to speak to that?
Yeah, well, I agree with the comments by Councillor Groom and the way that this is, positioned so close to the front house that when this block is split, it'll probably put some pressures on there that don't currently exist or were envisioned in the officer's report. But I also just wanted to point something out, and this is just more, just as a general, I guess, comment, maybe if that's allowed, because the Hilton specific planning scheme, or the Hilton, whatever, it's 3.7. It specifically says Hilton has aesthetic value for its parks, streetscapes, mature trees, areas of indigenous vegetation and bird life. Its stock of relatively intact modest housing, including both timber and brick cottages set on large lots, many with mature trees and gardens, contribute to the ambiance of the area and create a distinct, cohesive streetscape character. Now, this is something that in the application before us is explicitly said that this site has multiple trees in front and existing dwelling to the rear and site. The majority of these trees will be removed with the completion of this new addition, and that to me is something that I feel like the officers may have missed, in that the trees actually contribute to the streetscape of the entire garden precinct. And so in deferring this, it might give the applicant an opportunity to see if that might be something that they would consider retaining more of the trees on site, while also envisioning someone living in that front house down the track, and how their building might impact that. So
we're just waiting to get that on the screen now. If you'd like to have a look at it, make sure we're clear on the wording. Anybody else like to speak on this referral?
Ask a question if I could.
Councillor Sullivan. Can you turn your microphone on?
The subdivision of these lots is always controversial because of the way the Planning Commission kind of like doesn't allow the flexibility to increase the setbacks of the existing dwellings, because then the rear lot gets too small, apparently, or they're trying to maximise the area of the rear lot. But in terms of what Councillor Groom is saying, I tend to agree with her. But my question is, is the subdivision already lodged on this and gone through? And is it the subdivision that drives where these boundary lines are? Because in a sense, what I don't like seeing is wastage of land as well. And that's why, I totally understand why they would build to the boundary with their garage. But I sure as hell wish it was 2.5 metres away from the existing house. So rather than a metre or whatever it is. So even, and it has that scope to be able to do that. So I guess I'm just asking questions around the status of subdivision and the whether that sort of pretty well locks in where that wall is likely to be.
I'll ask the manager to respond to that.
Through you, Chair, at this point, I don't believe there is a subdivision application lodged at all. This is simply a group dwelling development at this stage.
So just a further question though, would the area of the land, if there was a greater setback to the existing cottage, would the area of the rear lot then be problematic from a West Australian Planning Commission perspective, or are they sort of happy to see the light and average things out?
The overall lot size looks like it's big enough to be able to reduce the rear lot, particularly if you propose common property for that access driveway. So the lot size at the rear could potentially be reduced.
So is any further comment before we move to a vote? Okay, we're voting on the referral. All those in favour? That's 5 in favour. Sorry, 6 in favour. Councillor against. Councillor Sullivan against. Thank you. So that's carried. You can talk to the officers tomorrow about what that means. The next item is item 6, Holland Street. Okay, additions to a single house recommended for approval, and the speaker is Hugh Wetters. You have 3 minutes. Thank you. Get very close to the microphone. Any questions of the applicant? Thank you. So we'll move into committee. I'll move the officer's recommendation, which is for approval. Is there a seconder? Councillor Lang. Any discussion? No discussion. All those in favour? Councillor Over. All those in favour? Sorry, Councillor again. All those in favour? Yes, that's unanimous. Thank you. Item 8, 56 Watkins Street. I've got Travis McQueen to speak. Thank you. Any questions of the applicant? No, thank you. The other people in the gallery don't wish to speak? No? Okay, thank you. So I'll move the officer's recommendation, which is for approval. Is there a seconder? Councillor Groom. Any discussion? Okay, so all those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. You can talk to the officers tomorrow about what happens next. Thank you. Deals with all the items where there are members of the public present. The next item, going back to the beginning of the agenda, is deferred item Brack Street number 90. I will move the officer's recommendation. Well, let me just check because we've got a recommendation from council, haven't we, as opposed to an officer's recommendation. Is that correct? Let's get this right. So we're looking on page 26.
May I take the opportunity to make a request of officers? So this agenda has come out without a table of contents on the sidebar that we can navigate, which is making this evening incredibly difficult. So if we could check in the future that they always come out with that navigation, that'd be great.
I'll second that.
So it's the, just to make it clear, this recommendation on page 20 is what was referred back to the committee by council. So what's the recommendation on page 26? That was Andrew's on moved amendment. I'm just checking, sorry about this. I think the recommendation on page 26 is the one that was tabled at council but not discussed. Is that correct? So just for your information, so page 20 is the recommendation that was referred back by council. Page 26 is the modified recommendation which was discussed at council but not moved. Is that clear? So I will move the recommendation on page 20. If someone wants to substitute the one page 26, they can do that by amendment. So I'll move the motion, the recommendation on page 20. Is there a seconder? So it's moved by, I'll move it, and it's seconded by Councillor Sullivan. Do you want to immediately move the amended version in, Councillor Sullivan?
So I'll just speak on it briefly before I do, because I've been working with Chloe, trying to work out how best to do this. I had some additional words as well. I don't know if it's been very late in the day, so I'm not sure whether Chloe's managed to get those through to the minutes secretary or the like. So she has. My sense is how we're going to deal with tonight. We're probably going to try and get as best a recommendation as we can, and then have it referred to council, or we can actually make the decision tonight. So I'm not too sure which way we're going. But what I'll do is I'll move my amendments, which are up on the screen, which are horribly confusing, but I'll speak to what the whole motion is trying to say, and then we can debate that.
Can I just clarify then, this is a new amendment, it's not either of the ones in the agenda. Is that correct?
That's right. It's very much a modified version of what I presented at council, but wasn't ultimately considered.
Just to check with the committee that people have seen the correspondence that came from the applicants this afternoon, which offered a compromise, although not a very good one. So I think maybe move and speak to the amendment, and then we'll decide whether to refer it to council or not. So you've moved the amendment. We've got a seconder. Councillor Lorber, would you like to speak to it?
Thanks. This is really, I don't like making things more complicated than they need to be. And of course, unfortunately, not everyone's going to be able to see everything that's up on that screen at one time. And they haven't got it electronically yet, because it was only really drafted sort of this afternoon, late this afternoon. In essence, the motion that I moved at council was basically to say that those three elements, the two lots of sheds and the wall that unifies them together, are the elements that we want to see conserved. What I've kind of like realized in a sense is, in fact, really what I'm trying to say is those two buildings, like all of them, and the wall are the bits that have cultural significance, sufficient cultural significance to warrant retention, but that, like the other proposal, that we're prepared to see that heritage dealt with in different ways, in an interim sense and in the long term. That not all of the buildings, even though they have cultural significance, not all of it has to be kept, and it doesn't have to be kept in the short term, in the sense that it can be dismantled and be readied for reconstruction. So following our meeting with the applicant on Monday, I took the view that it was a fairly reasonable approach to allow the dismantling of the roofs that are there, because the reality is they're going to have to remove those concrete slabs. They're going to have to remove the steel structural beams, the steel structural posts, which aren't heritage. So they're going to need to do a whole bunch of things on that site to get to the point where those buildings can be conserved. And the quickest and easiest way of doing that from a building point of view would be to dismantle the roof forms, put them aside, and then allow the demolition of the non-heritage fabric, which includes the steel columns, the steel truss, longitudinal trusses which support the heritage timber trusses, and also ultimately pull out the concrete slabs and deal with any minor contamination which might exist underneath them, and there may well be. So in that sense, what I concluded was, I'm not sure what's going on with this mic, but anyway, what I concluded was that allowing the deconstruction of the trusses and the trusses only was a reasonable step to take in the long-term conservation of those buildings. But the proposal that we would see the deconstruction of all of the brickwork was really quite a challenge for me because I didn't see the necessity for it, first of all, but I also didn't feel that it was the right thing to do from a conservation point of view. So just quickly going through, the way I landed with the amendment was to still require, to still exclude the three components from demolition approval, but then to speak to what you could do with them in the interim. So if you take part A, I'm assuming that the words above there are just sort of fixing it up a bit. But if you take part A, which is the central three-ridged building in the site, what it's basically doing, other than just tidying up some wording, is saying that the original fabric of that portion of the building that's to be conserved may be temporarily dismantled and stored in accordance with a conservation management plan. Now, the wording conservation management plan is something that Chloe and I discussed this afternoon, and it probably needs to be changed to something like a preservation strategy or something like that. But let's not worry about that right at this moment. Let's deal with the principle. And then what it then goes on to say, so that's for the bit of the building that, or the portion of the building that ultimately should be reinstated. And then it goes on to say that the rest of the trusses, i.e. the ones that aren't part of the building to be reinstated, should also be conserved in case they can be used for an interpretation somewhere else on the site, or unneeded because not all the trusses are in good enough condition or whatever. If we move to part B, if we can just scroll to that. So part B deals with the building closest to Brack Street. And after consideration, I decided I wouldn't change that. That building's still got the tin roof on it, on both bays. I don't see any immediate need to touch it or to demolish it because of asbestos. So I've just left that part of the recommendation as it is. And in part C, what I've done is to emphasise with the last bit that the wall is to remain or to be retained in situ, because I don't think it's logical to demolish a wall that doesn't need to be demolished and somehow store all the bricks and somehow rebuild it, because it will never have the same feel. And I've got to say, when I listened to the applicant on Monday, when he said, oh, well, you know, we'd have to punch openings in that wall to make it usable for a future use and everything. And I'm thinking, hang on, it's got these amazing doorways and these amazing windows, quite large windows, in a very nice rhythm for most of its distance. So I was left a little bit wondering whether they actually knew what they actually had, because I can see it as a fantastic elevation in that street. There is some more. Is it in there, Chloe? Or so just scroll up the. Okay, so what I'm suggesting I think actually, I'm not sure, this bit didn't go to council, did it, Chloe? So what Chloe had suggested was the stuff in black, and I think what I've done is my suggestions in greens, just to make that clear. So if we can just get back to 3, yep. So this is really about identifying the need for a conservation management plan to guide how they do all of that. It might be called a preservation plan or strategy, so let's not worry about the wording just yet. So this is about just talking to that, and it was suggested that we actually provide a bit of a list as to what that would entail. So that's what the A, B, C, and D and E, I think, are. So if we can scroll up, you can read all of those. And then I have also suggested a further condition. Sorry, it's Chloe's. This is Chloe's additional condition. So this is her bringing in. So the Chloe's additional condition was really just to put some legality around what you do when you demolish something and set it aside. So that's that aspect. And then I thought it was appropriate to basically put in an advice note or a footnote that really kind of explained what the hell we were doing. So that's, if you want to have a read of that, that's what that advice note is trying to articulate. It's also trying to articulate some of the things that were said on Monday so that they became part of the recommendation. So I might just give everyone a chance to have a read.
Can I just add something to ponder while we're reading for Councillor Sullivan? One of the things in the email that came through quite late from the proponents today was that either they would store the materials or we would at our cost at our depot, I think was the... So I'd be keen to see if there was somewhere in here that we could make it clear that the cost of storage would be on the proponent, not on the council.
Councillor Lang.
Thanks. I just have a question on this. So the facade that we keep in place, does that automatically get added to a heritage register or some kind of list somewhere? That's my question.
That's for a comment from the officers.
Through your chair, no. It's a quite separate process that gets places added to the heritage list. So this whole precinct is already in the North Fremantle Heritage Area, which is what's triggered the application. But for the places to be added to the heritage list as an individual place, it's a quite standalone process, separate from a development application, where the places, it goes through a proper heritage assessment. The results of that assessment get brought to Planning Committee and Council with a recommendation for it to be added. If Council supports that initial recommendation, and then has to be public consultation with the landowner, give the landowner an opportunity to comment, and the matter then comes back to Planning Committee and Council for a final decision on whether to add somewhere to the list or not. And you may remember actually last month's round of meetings was the report on the last year's annual review of and recommended changes to the heritage list, which included the additions of some places.
And the reason why I flagged this is just the recent demolition of the Coles Wool Store building. I don't know if anyone was watching that. Within that building, there were significantly large timber trusses, like we're describing in a moment, that I'm assuming a previous council went through a process to try and protect in the reinterpretation of that new Wool Store building. Second demolition round, that just got bowled over with no consideration. So I was just thinking, Councillor Sullivan's going to a lot of effort here, and then new apartments built, and then a new apartment's bowled over. What happens to all the work that's happening right now? That's what I'm wondering.
And if it is correct, the large timber frames in the wool stores were the poor heritage result, but they were retained as part of the original wool stores, and they were the original trusses of the wool stores, and they were very large. So I'm not sure what's happened to them. And I'm not sure if the wool press is being kept either. But any further discussion of this item? Councillor Lawler.
Yeah, and I support what Councillor Sullivan has put forward. I was just thinking in my head, when I was trying to find it and I couldn't, but maybe putting the actual words from the North Fremantle Heritage Precinct area about retention of the the industrial buildings in relation to the port. There's two key phrases. Maybe putting that in there would be. Oh, yep. So so achieving the objectives of retaining the focus of the on the industries relating to the Port of Fremantle, the railways and associated industries established in the area, and they were also trying to achieve objective B with its former industrial character resulting from the former Leighton marshalling yards and industries such as the Dangle flour mill located in the area. If putting those specific words in what we're trying to achieve would help clarify our intent, and that's what we're trying to preserve is those objectives in the precinct area itself.
If the mover and seconder are happy to accept that as an amendment, I'll.
Well, I'd actually thought about that when I was drafting it. I just didn't get time to do it. But I kind of feel like if it ends up getting sent up to council, then there's a sort of another iteration of this, sadly, that needs to happen anyway. So, but I agree. Two things that would be very good to include in this sort of statement. But I also there was another matter. No, I've lost it. I'm trying to think if it's what Councillor Lang was raising, but yeah, my sense is we are, what we're going to end up with is a building, and if they were demolishing it into the future, they'd be seeking a demolition application for a building. The problem with the wall stores was that it was so pathetic in the first place that it, was inevitable almost that those beams would get demolished, and there wouldn't necessarily be someone going, well, what are you going to do with them now? Because they still need to be reincorporated. I thought about raising it myself at the time. I did note that they did demolish them and put them aside, not necessarily very carefully, but they certainly put them aside, and they have disappeared separately. So I'm pretty sure they didn't just go straight to the tip, but I suspect they've been sold in a salvage yard somewhere. So yeah. Or they might form some part of one of Jared's houses. I don't know. So.
Can I just ask if you want to work on this tonight to get those words in, or refer to council and give people a chance?
Oh, look, it's up to the committee. If people are going to refer it up to full council anyway, then there's no urgency. I think the general thrust is what we need to get right tonight, and I'm pretty confident with the general thrust. So it's the thrust of allowing or keeping those buildings and allowing some practical way of letting them use the site and also manage the site between now and when they go to do a major development.
Mayor Fitzharding?
I mean, I'd be pretty keen to deal with this tonight if we could. I'm not sure, sort of given how long this has dragged on for, that we're going to get any closer to something that we feel comfortable with than where we are now. So, I mean, if we could put those words in tonight, I'd be pretty happy to support Councillor Sullivan's amendments, because I think that's really where we have got to, and I think taking it to full council isn't going to get it much into a different place anyway. So that's my view.
I'll just ask the officers to look at including that preamble, which Councillor Lawver asked for. I think we can just. Any further discussion whilst we're waiting for that wording?
Oh, I just have a question. If that's
Councillor Lawver?
We're considering the amendment to the motion. We're not debating the substantive issue yet. Oh, wait.
We are currently debating whether this amended recommendation should replace the one in the agenda.
So there was probably one other element, and I don't know whether I should raise it now, but basically changing the wording from a conservation management plan to what was the last word I had? I think it was just a preservation strategy. And I'll, when Chloe's free from dealing with the other matter, I'll get her to suggest if that's if we can just do that. That might make some sense. Just to explain that without the staff having to sort of listen to it, but in terms of the borough charter and the different types of conservation that exist, preservation is one of the conservation approaches. And so preservation is basically the maintaining of something without necessarily using it, or so it's really just, I guess, mothballing is probably the right word. So the preservation of something is where you're really just making sure you're hanging on to it, rather than some of the other types of conservation that exist. So using that word in caps, preservation strategy or plan.
I think I tend to agree with the Mayor that I'd rather deal with this tonight. I think we know what the applicant's response is going to be. So have we got the words that we need? Yep. Okay, so just check that again on the screen, then we'll hopefully move to a vote.
I'd like to make
Sorry, Councillor Groom.
a comment, if I may. So we're moving to a vote on the words. My view is that the first part of part 2 doesn't quite align with what the subpoints are now saying. So before we vote, I'd like to just quickly go back and check that so we get this one tidied away. But
This part 2.
yeah, so if I can just so conserved on site, made structurally sound where necessary and be maintained, because then we go on to say that they can go off site. So just right, okay.
Any further discussion?
Just to be clear on that,
Councillor
my
Sullivan.
sense is that the materials should not leave site. And so that is why originally I thought the shed closest to Brack Street should be retained so that it could be used as a storage shed for all of these trusses and materials, and that would be its use for the next 10 years.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah, so it kind of like just isolated that building, it gave it a use, and yeah, the risk when you let materials leave site is huge.
Councillor Groom, your microphone's on. Are you ready to move to a vote?
Do we want to change the conservation management plans to preservation management plans?
Do we looking for some recommended words?
So I did have a very brief chat with Gina this afternoon on this, and she's given me a bit of a brief spiel, which I might just read out because she summarised it quite well. So a conservation management plan is used to conserve and manage a heritage place, and it would be suitable if the building were being largely retained or a portion of the building was being retained. Something like an interpretation plan can be used to tell the history and social values of a place that can't necessarily be understood by looking at the fabric. So the term interpretation plan might be the best one in this instance.
No preservation.
Lang.
Yeah, there was a paragraph up there before from which Councillor Lorber described the future development should follow, prescribe certain details. Can I see that again, please? Oh, thanks. It's only an advice note. Okay, sorry. I missed that point. So it's wrapped up in that advice note, is it?
Are you referring to the conservation management plan issue?
I'm referring to the, there was a paragraph I saw on the screen a moment ago which said the future development should reflect the industrial nature of the surroundings, including the marshalling yards and Dingo Flower.
So I think that was a request from Councillor Groom to just add an additional advice note.
It's in the advice note, is it? Yep, okay. I just wanted to confirm where it was. Thanks.
Any further discussion? If you're happy with...
Well, I'm not sure I'm happy with the interpretation plan, but I think preservation plan's probably the best or closest. I know it's not necessarily defined, but we go on to define it anyway, so I don't think it matters too much. But because conservation management plan has an exact meaning, I think that advice from Gina would be dangerous to ignore because it could actually be a reason for them not to want to go ahead. So It's certainly not wanting that level of detail. The interpretation plan and or conservation plan, management plan, would literally come at the time that you would be looking to reinstate everything. That could just be you don't even need a conservation management plan if you've got a good application. So, but it doesn't hurt to have one in the future, but we don't need it right now. So rather than just say to you, search conservation management plan and replace it with preservation plan, there may just be a couple of spots in there where it actually means conservation management plan down the track. So I don't know. I think most of them you can probably just change the preservation plan. Yeah.
Do we need to take that as an amendment or drafting?
Well, I'm moving it. So if the
I'll
seconder is happy with that.
I'll accept that as a minor change to the amendment. Yeah. Any further discussion? Okay, we'll move to a vote. All those in favour of the amendment? That's unanimous, thank you, and that's a decision made tonight. So that vote was to replace the officer's recommendation with the amendment. Now we're going to vote on the amendment. So all those in favour? Sorry, you want to speak?
Yeah, well,
Councillor
I just had a question. So the financial implications for this is still listed as a nil. I know it's not necessarily planning, but it's in the report, and I'm just wondering if in the future, if there was actually, if this was all knocked down, if that would implicate or have an impact on our financial situation. Like if there were no buildings, would it impact the rateable, the rates that we collect from that property? Would it increase? Would it decrease? So I just was wondering if there was a way to potentially investigate that kind of issue a little bit more during these applications. And there's another one coming up that I have a similar question on.
Through your chair, just by way of explanation for Councillor Lawler, the financial implications comment in any report is basically addressing the direct subject matter of that report, not necessarily financial implications that may flow from a decision into the future. So in that context, the nil is referring to the financial implications impact of this development application in itself on the city. There might well be implications from a rating point of view, but that's a separate issue, that is obviously a consequence of different legislation and regulations that deal with rating, not as a consequence of the DA. So that's why officers in expressing it as nil have done it that way, because it's true the DA in itself doesn't have that financial implication.
Okay, so Councillor Sullivan.
Just wanted to comment about the issue of whether or not we should also have in this, and I can't remember whether it's in there or not, a condition that basically, a further condition that actually deals with the fact that it's not currently individually listed, and that we should be making a statement that it is considered a report. Is it in there? Okay, it's already in there. Yeah, I thought I'd included it, and so.
Can we ready to vote then?
Can we just make sure that
last chance to speak for anybody? All those in favour of the amended motion?
We're just
sorry.
Just to Andrew's question, so on page 30 of our papers, so the amended item, Part B reads, the officers provide a further report and recommendation to council regarding the heritage significance of the Massey Harry buildings, etc. So that is in there. That is part of what we are voting on.
Yes, it is. Okay. So all those in favour of the amended recommendation? Thank you. That's unanimous and made on a delegation. Just do you want to get off early to do your topic first? Not much. Okay. So we'll go back to item 2. Councillor Sullivan is leaving the room. So this is alterations and additions to a single house plus an ancillary dwelling. I'll move the officer's recommendation, which is for approval. Is there a seconder? Councillor Groom. Anybody wish to speak? Okay, all those in favour? That's unanimous. Made by delegation. Pause. Colic Street Childcare Centre. Item 4 is a JDAP application, childcare centre in Colic Street, recommended for approval. I'll move the officer's recommendation. Is there a seconder? Councillor Groom. Any discussion?
Just a minor point that came up in the briefing was around the treatment of the verge area around there, and driving past it daily, I think it is, I'm not sure we need to do it as a, a specific condition. Well, I take your advice about how we do it, but we definitely need to prevent parking on the verge there. So I think bollards, or preferably some kind of soft landscaping or something, just given visibility with the bus stop and other things there, I think could be quite essential. So yeah, if you think we need to deal with that, it would be something that's quite important. I think safety.
Ask the officer to respond to that.
So I did have a quick chat to our traffic engineers about this, and they agreed people in four-wheel drives parking up on the verge is probably relatively likely, and they advised that the best solution was probably just some low landscaping on the verge rather than solid bollards and things, which tend to get hit anyway. But the lower landscaping makes it quite clear it's a garden and makes it hard to park on, and also ends up with quite a good outcome. So committee could choose to put a condition on about landscaping that verge area, and I do have something drafted if you would like to see that.
So would you like to do that?
I'd be happy to move that way.
Waiting for something to be drafted on that. Councillor Lorber.
Yes, thank you, Chair. On this one here, I won't ask my question about rates because you answered that on the other one, because it's going from a church to a daycare. But it says in accordance with Clause 7 of the policy, where development is associated with a non-residential use class, that the development shall be compatible with the heritage significance of the Hilton Garden Suburb Precinct Heritage Area, as well as Local Planning Scheme 4. And then earlier on in there, it talked about how this the facade of this building actually wasn't necessarily in line with it, but that daycares are going to be bright and colorful anyways. So I was just wondering how having that bright and colorful facade is in line with the Hilton Garden Suburb Precinct Heritage Area policy.
Comment from the officers?
I guess the key for this site is that they are retaining the church in its current format, and yes, they are painting the external finish of the building, but that doesn't necessarily require planning approval. So someone could come along and paint their Hilton House, for example, in multiple different colours. The applicant is also keeping the large tree that is on site today, and while they are reducing car parking, they're turning it into a play area. So it could potentially be a better outcome for the streetscape with this design.
Yeah, I appreciate them retaining the tree, but the other thing is there's also like a big sign in some of the drawings that looks like they're putting up as well, and there's really nothing like that on Colic Street at the moment.
Yeah, look, this is an unusual one. A childcare centre in a residential area always is going to look a little bit different, and the signage policy doesn't necessarily bring into play all the significance of heritage areas and things, and it does allow a pylon sign. Now, committee could take the view that perhaps there is too much signage for this site. It is a little bit tenuous, and obviously being a business the need to have some signage to make it clear where they are located and where entries and things are is logical. From our perspective, the sign doesn't detract too much from the streetscape itself, given the site is quite clearly not an original Hilton home, and it is sort of right on that intersection.
The landscaping amendment is on the screen. Would you like to move that, Mavis Harding? Seconder, Councillor Lang. Any discussion on the amendment? Councillor Sullivan.
I suggest that it says after so provide a verge landscaping plan that restricts verge parking, because I think it needs to be made very clear that it's a combination of beautification and purpose.
We'll accept that as a minor change to the wording. Any further discussion on the amendment? Okay, all those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. So back to the as amended. Is there any further discussion? Councillor Lover.
Okay, can I move an amendment to remove the conditional to remove the approval for the signage? Just because I think if there's going to be this colorful building, it's going to stand out anyways, and the College Street really doesn't have a lot of commercial or really any signage on it, and I think adding that element into the residential neighborhoods of Hilton might actually really detract from the garden precinct suburb, however that's worded. So while I mean I'm supportive of the concept, I just where this is really going to stick out and it's going to make a huge change to a neighborhood that this council has put a lot of time and effort into maintaining as it is, and without that sign, I think it would be more acceptable.
So do you want to remove a particular sign, or just ask for the signage to be limited? Just the one pylon sign.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was interested in the additional information. It referenced it's not dissimilar to the proposed pylon sign at Amici Early Learning, but there is no pylon sign. So I mean, unless they're asking for one too, which I assume they then would, should we approve one, 4 doors down? Yeah. So I mean, I'm supportive of the.
So would you like to move that as an amendment? Removal of the pylon sign? Have some words.
And I apologize for not flagging this earlier. I just thought it would be a minor thing.
The wording on the screen. You happy to move that way, Councillor Lorber? Yes. Seconder, Mavis Harding. Any discussion on that amendment? Okay, we'll vote on that amendment. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. And are we ready to vote on the application as a whole, or any further discussion? Okay, on the application as a whole, all those in favour? That's you carried unanimously. Thank you. Next item is number 6 Montgomery Street. Additions and alterations to a single house. I'll move the officer's recommendation to a seconder. Sorry? Yeah, okay, sorry. Item 7 Amherst, that's the lady who spoke earlier. The studio in the front garden. I will move the officer's recommendation, though I don't support it and I won't be voting for it, but I'll move it for the sake of argument. Is there a seconder? Mavis Harding. Any? I'll just 7. Item 7. Okay, I'll just speak against the officer's recommendation if I can. Having visited the site, it's entirely surrounded by large vegetation. The single reason for refusal was the setback from the street, but the building actually is not visible from the street. And ironically, the streetscape setback is set by the 3 townhouses that used to be the garden of this house. So this house has a large setback. It's then been subdivided on a strata. And then the townhouses built as part of the strata are much closer to the street, and that's why it fails the streetscape test. So it seems to me that I would support the officer's alternative recommendation. Now, I've moved the refusal, so we can vote on that first. If there's any further discussion on the refusal. In favour of refusal? Okay, against? So that's lost. There is. Sorry?
Chair, can you just clarify, Councillor Glover, you're voting for the refusal or against the refusal?
No, I would support the not the initial officer's recommendation, the alternate. So
Okay.
I'd like to.
I'll just do that again to be sure then. So those in favour of the refusal? None. Those against the refusal? That's unanimous. I'll then move the alternative recommendation, which is for approval. Is there a seconder? Councillor Lang. All those in favour? That's passed unanimously. Thank you. So now back to item 9. Item 9 is on page 112. Alterations and additions to 6 Montgomery Street. I move the officer's recommendation for approval. Is there a seconder? Councillor Kamada. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Item 11, Item 11 is review of heritage areas, draft local policy planning. Sorry, yeah. I'll do the information report. Sorry, item 10, which is on page 118. Are there any questions before I move that on the information report? Okay, I'll move the information report we received. Seconder, Councillor Groom. All those in favour? That's unanimous, thank you. Item 11, review of heritage areas, draft local policy. Recommendation is on page 128. I'll move the officer's recommendation. Is there a seconder? Councillor Groom. Any discussion? This is going to council anyway. Any discussion? Okay. All those in favour? That's unanimous. And item 12, review of South Fremantle local planning policies. I'll move the officer's recommendation. Is there a seconder? Mayor Fitzharding. Any discussion? Councillor Sullivan.
I just flagged that it was raised at the precinct meeting as well last night. So the comments that were made tonight, but also some questions were raised, and I haven't had a chance to review those questions in relation to the policies that we're deleting. So I'm just flagging. I know it's going to council, but given that I've had a raging headache for the last 5 days, I wasn't really keen to read all of the strategic planning stuff over the weekend, so I couldn't do it justice as well as everything else. Sorry for that.
Just go to council anyway. So.
But I've flagged that I might have a closer look at these ones.
Do you wish to speak on that? Yeah.
Thank you. We will be providing a response to the questions that were raised in question time, and obviously anything we receive through from any elected members. But it is important in reviewing these policy reviews that we're doing as part of the staged update to recognise the role of a local planning policy, which is essentially to guide decisions made under the scheme, not to guide possible future decisions on rezoning, which should be guided by the local planning strategy. So although some of these sort of technicalities are perhaps often lost, they are very important in deciding where council wants to go with its future policy framework. No, in some regards, there's no harm in having policies left on the books that provide general statements of intent or views, but they can sometimes complicate appealed situations, hence one of the reasons why we do prefer to update the policy framework to make sure that it's tight, it's robust,
and it works within the legislated system. So I'm just providing that as some general content and context, because these policy reviews that we're doing at the moment, I'm very well aware, can be seen from two perspectives. And the queries that were raised tonight are, I think, a reflective of that perspective.
Councillor Groom.
Can I just ask a question? Given that I guess there is kind of live information that people may want answers to, are we able to defer a decision on this, or should we, given that it's going to council anyway, or should we?
It makes no difference. Our recommendation goes to council, and council can alter it. So.
That's right. Or we cannot decide tonight because we're waiting for
or
information.
you can alter it tonight. Yeah. But it's the council to alter it. So.
That's what I mean. Yeah. Sorry, referral. Yeah. Okay.
Well, that would be exactly the same as sending it to council. I mean, you could vote for it, and then you could put in an amendment to council.
No, I understand that. I don't know that I feel informed enough to make a decision either way. That's what I'm trying to, given the question.
So, do you want to refer it to council? Okay, you want to move that way? Okay, seconder, Councillor Sullivan. All those in favour?
So it probably needs a reason. Normally, a referral motion has a reason. It would be to give consideration to the additional comments that have come from the community. Just so that it has a purpose.
Yeah.
Because a referral should have a purpose.
But it also shows that we're listening, so I think that's good.
So just for clarification, if that referral motion is passed, the effect of that will be that the same report will go to council with the same officer recommendation, but there will be no committee recommendation. The committee resolution will simply be the matters being referred to council for the reason, with the reason Councillor Sullivan rightly suggested. Yeah.
Okay, everybody happy to vote on the referral? Okay, all those in favour? That's unanimous. Item 11, motions with previous notice. There are none. Item 12, urgent business. None. Item 13, late items. There are none. Item 14, confidential business. There are none. And close the meeting at 7:53, which is somewhat earlier than expected. Okay, thank you for your attendance, and thank you, Phillida, for your service to the council.